Hey everyone. Moms against medical bullying. So I wanted to get a little bit spiritual in this video when it comes to talking about vaccination. Okay. I know a lot of people don't like to go there, right? Everybody has different spiritual beliefs. But where I want to go is I feel like throughout history, there's a common thread, right? Being that vaccination is so pushed and is so, you can just feel that there's something behind vaccination that is very strong and forceful and dark, because of the way that people respond, the anger, the fear. All right. So, I feel like this topic is begging me to go deeper, to go to the root. I want to go down to the root and see where this thing comes from. So, I'm not saying that I've gotten there or anything like that, but from what I've been reading, it reminds me of what the Bible says when, I believe it was Paul, or in the New Testament, he makes a distinction about how there's one group of, men, like the Greeks or whatever. They like knowledge, they like wisdom, they like to know things, and then there's the other group of people that like signs and miracles, and they want to see things, like spiritual things, whether that be, of God or witchcraft, spells and divination, and they like those things. So I feel like, I don't know, I almost feel like there's been a battle between these two sides, a war almost. So I haven't figured it out, but those are just my thoughts on it. Everything has like a root. So that's why I just feel like going, like, where did this come from? What's going on here? What's really going on? Do you know? So, and you can't deny the spiritual aspects in the spiritual world. Like, we're spiritual beings. You can't really deny that. Anyway, I'm going to pick up where I left off on Gender and Vaccination, written in 1889 by Dr. Charles Creighton. And I'm going to get back to the point that I was making, that I just made in the beginning of the video. But in my last video, I read the results of one doctor's test with inoculation, the variolis test. So, okay, so Boddington, which was, I guess, another medical man, he found in the case of his own child that the test produced not only the local pustule, but also the general smallpox eruption. So this guy, he's a medical man. He did the test on his own kid, and his own kid got sick. So, but listen, I find it so interesting what Jenner responds to this man, because this is the same exact spirit of today. The same thing, the same denials. So Jenner, in reply, gave him a tremendous wigging. How a gentleman following a profession, the guardian angel of which is fame, should have so committed himself as to have called this a case of smallpox after cowpox is not only astonishing to me, but must be so to all who know anything of the animal economy. So he didn't take this man's concerns seriously. He just gaslighted him like they do today. Like, are you serious? And I find it interesting, his language, the guardian angel of which is fame, So was he in it for the fame? Did he want the glory, of saving humanity? So this, as Barron says, is a good illustration of Jenner's method of dealing with rumors of that kind. So they just shut them down. Just like today, when doctors present their concerns about vaccination, they are immediately shut down and dealt with. That's it. Their concerns are not taken into consideration. It is not up for discussion. So, Jenner's bullying attempt to refer it simply to the child's tender skin should be pondered by all who believe his reasoning powers to have been masterly. So, again, another tactic used by medical men today, blaming it on you. Well, you had a reaction because something is wrong with you, not because the vaccine is toxic and contains harmful ingredients, but because something is simply wrong with you. So, this is where it began. I mean, it could have began before that, but as far as medical men and being in denial, I feel like this is where it began, the bullying. And I don't know what kind of contacts or what Jenner was involved in, per se, but he was not willing to hear anybody's experience on this inoculation. So he blamed it on the kid. Same thing that carries on today, of course, because they take after their forefathers. So the total of some 2,000 successful English tests, which got extensively quoted abroad, helped greatly to recommend, the new practice, which was made up of Woodville's hundreds, of Marshall's 200 odd, of Pearson's scores of cases, and of other large aggregates, of which the details were never given. So these three men, Woodville, Marshall, and Pearson, they also did these variolous tests. So, and what Creighton is saying is that the sequence, the details of these variolous tests were not given. So, whenever we have the opportunity to scrutinize the actual sequence of events, we find that the inoculation of smallpox was nearly always followed by some degree of local action, and in most cases, by a full and correct variolous pustule. It was chiefly the eruptive fever and the general eruption which aborted or remained in abeyance. A common experience, probably the average experience, was thus stated in a letter to Jenner by W. Forbes of Camberwell, who applied the test a good many times. So Camberwell says to Jenner, although the variolous inflammation perfectly succeeded, and I have no doubt would have infected others inoculated with the fluid secreted, yet the constitutional progress was as completely arrested as if the patient had gone through the smallpox before. So here, Forbes is praising inoculation. He's saying, yes, they did get the inflammation and so on and so forth, but he's saying that it seems like, that it worked. So, in their indifference to the production of local smallpox and testing the virtue of cowpox, and to any slight show of the eruptive fever, the profession betrayed a singular faculty for dropping all at once a mode of reasoning that they had made great account of under the old inoculation regime. So this was apparently the new inoculation. There was an old inoculation regime. So the slight effects of the smallpox inoculation, mostly the local effects, which were thought nothing of when the inoculation was done to test the protective virtue of preceding cowpox, had been held of the utmost account, had been carefully noted and liberally appraised when inoculation was an end in itself or when it was done in the ordinary way of pre-Jennerian protection. In order to make clear to modern readers this use of a double standard of what constituted effective variolation, it will be necessary to go back some 30 years prior to the advent of Jenner. So, the years 1764 to 1767 saw the rise of a new method of smallpox inoculation in England and a lively controversy thereon. So he goes on to say that it was first introduced from Turkey by Maitland at the instance of Lady Mary Wortley Montagu in 1721. They see here, from the depths of its unpopularity, it emerged shortly after to enjoy a qualified success. Okay, so hold on, let me go back and read here. So Mary Wortley Montagu, 1721. It can hardly be said that they scamped their work. They seem to have given a considerable dose of the inoculated smallpox, either unavoidably or of choice, with the intention of anticipating the attack of it in the ordinary way of epidemic or epidemic contagion. The severity of the engrafted disease was a serious bar to the general adoption of this Turkish and beauty-saving artifice, and in a few years it fell into considerable disrepute. From the depths of its unpopularity, it emerged shortly after to enjoy a qualified success. And from the year 1764, when the Suetonian method was introduced, it continued in vogue in England until it was superseded by Jenner's cowpox. Yeah. So, of the method as practiced before Sutton's and Dimsdale's time, we may take our impressions from the well-written essay by James Burgess. So he wants to even go back. So before Jenner was Sutton and Dimsdale's time. And they were inoculating, I guess, just with the smallpox, not with cowpox. But before that was Lady Mary Montagu. But then even before that, says we may take our impressions from James Burgess. The obvious thing in the essay of Burgess is his anxiety to bring out the eruption, to give it facilities, for coming out and to obviate whatever would tend to repress or repercuss it. The Borhavian pathology of the time was used as a scientific justification of these common sense aims. Warmth in bed was advised, lest the external air should obstruct the exclusion of the infectious matter. So Richard Holland in 1728, let's see, had a common sense concern. In a genuine and complete eruption, the matter of the disease is entirely evacuated, and therefore there is no possibility of a return. But in an imperfect crisis, part of the original cause may remain. It was only when the general eruption of the engrafted smallpox was checked by a chill or other accident that the early inoculators counted it a failure. So, if the pustules died away or came to nothing when due care had been taken, it meant the habit was favorable. So, but in Burgess, we may notice also the first insidious beginnings of a mode of reasoning which was carried to great lengths a few years later. The original practice in England was to insert the smallpox matter at a quite large and deep incision in the arm, and in some instances to keep open the sore so produce as a rendering issue for weeks after. But now let us carefully observe the significance that Burgess puts upon this abeyance of the eruption. But if the sores keep open and the feverish symptoms come on at the usual time, though not a single pustule should appear, I'm convinced that the patient is as secure from ever having the smallpox as if there had been a plentiful eruption. Other means preferable to an open sore on the arm, rendering matter for weeks, were soon found to keep back the general eruption without impairing the value of the protection given by the single representative local pustule. This was the new method of inoculation, begun in France by the famous inoculator Angelo Gatti, practiced in England to their own enrichment by Daniel Sutton and by Dr. Dimsdale of Hertford, and after a vain remonstrance by 2 or 3 staunch men, generally approved by Sir George Baker, Sir William Watson, and other leaders of the profession in the latter half of the 18th century. Let's see. In the Gotti found respectable or scientific reasons for the vulgar charlatanism of old women in the Levant. Sir George Baker approvingly quotes him to this effect, 1766. He says, in the Levant, old women have inoculated 10,000 people without an accident. They only ask, is a person prepared by nature? Is the breath sweet? Is the skin soft? Does a little wound heal easily? Then the inoculation may be undertaken without the least fear of danger. These were the only conditions made by the old witches of Mussulman countries. That's what caught me there. And maybe he actually says witches. These were the only conditions made by the old witches of Mussulman countries. But the conditions were the quintessence of craft, whether Sir George Baker knew it or not. They meant no less than a selection of such subjects as experience had shown to be likely to have the milder form of smallpox by inoculation, those that were prepared by nature, meaning I'm thinking those that had had it before. Gatti, in the exercise of his art in France, could hardly pick his cases by the divination which old women in the East were privileged to exercise. So I looked up Levant, and that apparently is around where Syria is. Instead of making a large incision and laying the matter therein upon a thread, he made a small oblique puncture with a lancet point, inserted the minutest quantity of matter. Moreover, he took the matter from as early a stage of the natural smallpox as any fluid could be got at all, and from the mildest case, and improving upon that, he at length transferred matter from the early vesicle of one inoculated arm to another person's arm, so on through a series of cases from arm to arm. He dropped the old treatment that had been used to bring out the eruption. He often succeeded, with the help of his other arts, in limiting the whole process to the primary smallpox pustule at the place of insertion. For some time, Gatti did a large business in his new method of inoculation, amassing a fortune and acquiring fame. At length, an accident happened in case of great lady, the Duchess of Beaufleurs, 2 years and a half after being inoculated by Gatti and assured him of protection. She had an attack of smallpox, which made a great noise. About the same time, many other persons in Paris who had been inoculated by Gatti confidingly exposed themselves among the sick during an epidemic of smallpox, with the result that they caught the disease in large numbers, and not a few of them died of it. These accidents made an end of Gatti's credit, and the practice of inoculation by whatever method was forbidden in Paris by a statute of the Parliament. So, yeah, I'm going to stop there. It's very confusing because he goes through a lot of names and a lot of history and people. But I found it extremely interesting that he mentioned witches, doing this inoculation thing. So I wanna go deeper down that road, I feel like, because I thought a long time ago that vaccinations were the witch's brew, and that was before I knew any of that. Just because of the nature of what's in them, mixing our blood with animal blood, just and how vaccines are so contaminated, and so on and so forth. There's nothing good about vaccination, and there is a great darkness behind it. If you're a spiritual person, you would probably know what I'm talking about when you think about vaccines and, say you meditate on that or pray about that. There is something that's strong behind it. That's not just, it's not just something that doctors do. There's something that has a rooted history that is a stronghold, I would say. And despite its ineffectiveness, it has been allowed to grow and grow and grow and grow into the massive giant that it is today, harming tens of thousands of kids and people, causing all kinds of chronic disease and ailments, which the Department of Health and Human Services compensates people for. Although the Department of Health and Human Services, of course, does not admit that the things that these people are going through are from the vaccine. They basically say, well, we'll compensate you if I don't know, it's confusing. It's like, we'll compensate you if we think that your reasons are justified enough, but we won't still say that the vaccine did it. But we'll compensate you. So it's really dark. And a lot of people probably don't want to think about that or go there, but it's always, and so it had me thinking, the whole thing about the witches and everything like that. If they knew that that was the part of the history of this idea, this theory, why would they want to take something that the witches do? Is it that they thought, oh, we want to steal this sorcery, we want to steal this idea from the witches because we hate the witches, but we want to see if it works, and we want to take this idea and we want the glory. We want to be magnified, if this theory of inoculation works. They didn't want the witches to have the power or whatever. I just was thinking, and chewing on what and why, the medical men so badly wanted to adopt this practice. So I am ending the stream.